if there is a country that has committed unspeakable atrocities in the world, it is the United States of America.
Globally, there's a need for countries to stand up to the likes of the US and other powers.
We shouldn't punch above our weight. We're a small player, and I think it's best that we keep our heads low.
I don't think we should respond. We should be aware of what's going on.
What America's done is completely unacceptable.
United States, Donald Trump, military action. They're all topical, and it starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. We are living in interesting times, my brothers and sisters. A grave time is how the United Nations chief, António Guterres, described it in remarks to the Security Council on Venezuela. He said he is deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regards to the 3 January military action by the United States. The UN Charter, it enshrines the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Guterres said that the maintenance of international peace and security, it depends on the continued commitment of all member states to adhere to all provisions of the Charter. So I guess the big question is, what sort of precedent has Donald Trump set? As Jeffrey Sachs said, the issue is not about the character of the government of Venezuela, right? The issue is whether any member states, by force, coercion, or economic strangulation, has the right to determine Venezuela's political future or exercise control over its affairs. It's an important point, and I guess it sets up tonight's discussion very well. Sachs, by the way, is the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Have a look at this. He went on to reference political scientist Lindsay O'Rourke's book, Covert Regime Change. Now, O'Rourke documents about 70 attempted US regime change operations between 1947 and 1989 alone, 70. Since 1989, major US regime change operations undertaken without authorization by the UN Security Council have included among the most consequential Iraq, Libya, Syria, Honduras, Ukraine, in 2014 that is, and Venezuela, he says, from 2002 onwards. Now, is the recent action by the United States a high-minded pretense or absolutely necessary? The US State Department putting this out on X, stating, this is our hemisphere, and President Trump will not allow our security to be threatened. US Representative to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, said President Trump gave diplomacy a chance. He offered President Maduro multiple off-ramps, he said. He said he tried to de-escalate. Maduro refused to take them. He added that the United States will not waver in their actions to protect Americans from the scourge of narco-terrorism. What is that? Well, it's basic terrorism associated with the trade in illegal drugs. And also it seeks peace, liberty, and justice for the people of Venezuela. It brings us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, what assessment can be made of South Africa's diplomatic response to events in Venezuela and the threat of other invasions around the world? We'd love to hear your thoughts at SABC News_TV. Let's walk and talk, get you some context. And as always, as been the custom on It's Topical, we're opening up the lines. 011-714-0677-7879. 011-714-0677-7879. Get calling. I'd love to take you live on air, get your perspective. It's coming up. Now, whether Nicolas Maduro represented the legitimate will of the Venezuelan people is one issue. The way in which he was removed is a completely different issue, right? And arguably far more consequential for the rest of the world. Let's tee up the discussion for you, what we know and why it matters. Have a look at these two folks. By now, many in South Africa have heard about the Monroe doctrine dating back to 1823, right? President Donald Trump coined a new term, seemingly to describe his approach to foreign policy, called the Monroe doctrine. Then US President James Monroe, on your left-hand side, put his approach in play to oppose European interference in the Western Hemisphere. So, what will the Monroe doctrine mean for the rest of the world in the near future? Let's discuss with a better mind than mine. SABC News Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease is live for us in New York. Sherwin, good to see you. Let's talk firstly about this. The national security strategy of the United States of America. In particular, the section titled, "What Do We Want in and from the World," right? So this actually jumped out at me. We want to halt and reverse the ongoing damage that foreign actors inflict on the American economy while keeping the Indo-Pacific free and open, preserving freedom of navigation in all crucial sea lanes, and maintaining secure and reliable chains and access to critical minerals. Now, Sherwin, how does this section talk to the latest developments?
I'll read you an excerpt of an analysis done, Blaine, by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a think tank based out of Washington, D.C., and they write that the administration is attempting to define a new America First foreign policy doctrine that is deeply pragmatic and perhaps short-sighted. For example, the democracy agenda is clearly over. Not a statement to be taken lightly. Essentially, they're saying that the democracy agenda of the United States in its foreign policy dealings has now come to an end. So where does that focus then shift to? And they continue like this. Foreign policy choices will be made based on what makes the United States more powerful and more prosperous. They say that that's fair and clearly what the American people voted for. But today's self-interested choices may lead to a far lonelier, weaker, and more fractured future. This, they say, is a truly pivotal moment in the way the world works. And I think, it really encapsulates what this America First policy means on the international stage. The misconception was that America First would be an America that was being more introspective, less the policeman of the world. And certainly in Donald Trump's first term, that might have been true, but we are seeing a more assertive American foreign policy, what the Secretary of War or the previously known Secretary of Defense calls peace through strength. There was a proposal put out by the White House just last week seeking congressional approval for an increase in the military budget, Blaine, that is already at about $981 billion. In 2027, the White House is seeking a budget of $1.5 trillion. That tells you that they want a strong military because America is seeking to use that military might, to use its economic might, right? Read tariffs there, to influence different spheres around the world, but particularly the sphere you pointed out there, the Western Hemisphere. I'll tell you what Marco Rubio said on Sunday programs like yours just a weekend ago. This is the Western Hemisphere, he said. This is where we live, and we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be the base of operations for our adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States. So your Monroe Doctrine becoming your Monroe Doctrine, and essentially using America's military and economic might to assert itself even in far-flung areas around the world. I mean, ask South Africa, ask Nigeria, ask the Danish today about Denmark, and the list goes on. And so you talk about the Indo-Pacific, keeping the flow of supply chains and in those waters over there, contested by who? China, right? And so a clear message there that America is going to assert itself not only here at home, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but in other hemispheres around the world as well.
So it also then draws into sharp focus global institutions, right? I was listening to the UN Secretary General's remarks to the Security Council on Venezuela, saying that in situations and as confused and complex as this one that we now face, it is important to stick to principles and respect the UN Charter. But I guess it then begs the question, are our global institutions strong enough to handle shifting power politics?
They're strong enough in terms of asserting what we know to be true. They're strong enough in asserting what member states have agreed to. And when you sign up to be a member of the United Nations, you sign what is known as the UN Charter, which is essentially a global treaty that tells you about the rules of the road. And so very good at convening meetings, getting the different views around the table. That is what the United Nations is known for. But it doesn't have a military force to assert the decisions that are taken by the UN Security Council. The basis of the Council functioning as it was intended after the Second World War was a consensus-driven notion that the big powers that agreed after World War II that they didn't want a repeat of that kind of scenario, your Russias, your USA, France, China, and the United Kingdom, the basis of the Council functioning is if you find consensus, particularly among those P5. And what you're now seeing is Russia asserting itself in Ukraine, violating the UN Charter, crossing borders, which is sacrosanct. You talked about the importance of borders in terms of the UN Charter. The United States doing that in Venezuela, saying it is happy to do so in Greenland, threatening Nigeria in similar ways. And so you see the unraveling of these institutions because the main guardians of the prescripts of the United Nations Charter are now violating that. And so the question then becomes, who can fill that vacuum? The United States has the largest, most strongest military in the world. There is no competent force that can meet that on the battlefield. So where do we go from here remains an open question.
Yeah, and the other question is, who's next, right? Has been on the lips of many wondering. Trump seems to think that Cuba is ready to fall. He said that he does think that it needs U.S. action. He was speaking about Mexico, that they have to get their act together and they may have to do something about it. That is the U.S. Greenland, much talk on Greenland. He said he wants to make a deal the easy way or the hard way. Are world leaders taking him seriously?
Absolutely. I mean, just look at how the Europeans have responded. There was a joint statement out of, I think it was France, Poland, Germany, the UK, and Italy, I think, was part of that statement, saying that they're ready to defend the UN Charter and that all engagement needs to happen around the prescripts that are embedded in that language. We also are seeing reports that the British, the French, and the Germans had a meeting about deploying a NATO force to Greenland, a NATO force against a NATO ally in the United States. So in that sense, I do think they're taking it very seriously. The president posting on Truth Social this morning and then retweeted on X by the White House that there will be no more oil or money going to Cuba, zero. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it's too late. Very threatening language there based on what you saw and the close relationship Cuba enjoyed with Caracas, right? Caracas giving oil, the Cubans providing intelligence and security apparatus that essentially failed in protecting Nicolas Maduro. So I think them, certainly taking that threat very, very seriously. And then very, very pressing. The New York Times reporting over this weekend that Trump has been briefed, Blaine, on options for striking Iran amid ongoing protests there against the economic conditions there and various human rights concerns proliferating those protests. And, Trump, of course, posting last week that Iran is looking for freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help. The question is, what does that help look like? And there is precedent already, most recent precedent in terms of US engagement or military strikes against nuclear facilities in Iran. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the military apparatus, the Speaker of Parliament hitting back, saying that the United States would be miscalculating were they to involve themselves again in the internal affairs of Iran. But certainly a lot of questions were asked about Iran's competence in standing up militarily against the United States, given just how easily those nuclear sites were attacked by the US last year.
We shall see. As you know, showing three of the most loaded words in geopolitics. SABC News correspondent Sean Bryce Pease, live for us in New York. Thank you, sir, for your input. We will discuss this in greater detail in a short while. Now, onto our regular word on the street feature. We took to various streets of Johannesburg, seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic, and this is what you had to say.
It's our duty, regardless of the problems that we have in South Africa. I think globally there's a need for countries to stand up to the likes of the US and other powers. And at the end of the day, many countries did this for us back when we were struggling. And I think it's fair that we stand up.
I don't think it's necessary for us to get involved. I think they can sort out their own problems and their countries can work on that. I don't think South Africa needs to get involved in that.
What America's done is completely unacceptable. I think that they've broken international law, and I think that those are very dangerous actions.
Where we are in South Africa now, I think we can be aware of it, and we can say that this was either a bad move or a good move, depending on which side of the spectrum you're on. But we need to focus on our own problems. We need to get ourselves right.
You should intervene in a way that is going to cause peace.
I think we shouldn't punch above our weight. We're a small player, and I think it's best that we keep our heads low and we stay out of it. I think bringing more attention to us is not good at this point.
We should support democracies and focus on our own democracy, because there's lots of work that needs to be done right in our own backyard. And I think our government must do more to do more about that and worry less about what's going on, next door.
Really appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's get the discussion on the road. 011-714-0677-7879. That's the number to dial. We've gathered a whole panel of the better minds on tonight's program to get some perspective. SABC News Specialist Correspondent Sophie Mokoena is joining me. Thank you so much, Sophie. Also joining us virtually is Dr. Sakhile Hadebe, is the lecturer, political science and international relations at the University of KwaZulu Natal, as well as Thembisa Fakude, a senior research fellow and director at Africa-Asia Dialogues. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. That number again, 011-714-0677-7879. There's a number on your screen. Get dialing. We'll take you live. Talk to Sophie, talk to Dr. Hadebe, as well as Mr. Fakude, to get your perspective, your questions for our guests. Sophie, let me just start with you. There seems to be little room for conspiracy theories here, because Donald Trump many times mentioned oil as one of the major factors in terms of going into Venezuela. The narco-terrorism issue is one side. So help us understand how the world is now processing all these developments.
Well, I think, as Shawan has indicated, countries are really looking at what President Trump is doing and saying, and really taking his statements or utterances very serious. They know when he speaks, he is going to do what he indicated that he is going to do. And we have many examples. And therefore, no one is taking it light that he's just making statements and it's just a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
No, they do understand. And when you talk about President Trump, in this term, he is quite clear that he has now revived James Monroe's doctrine of 1823, where you are ensuring that countries of the Western Hemisphere, no other region or country is having full control and influence, because that will threaten the security.
Yeah.
Above all, the interest of the United States of America. In 1823, it was about Europe.
Right.
This time around, with President Trump reviving Monroe Doctrine, is about Russia and China, because both countries have built strong relations with the Latin American countries, and therefore this is what is happening. What surprises me, when he's talking about leaders of these two powers, he is very diplomatic and friendly. For example, President Vladimir Putin. But the reality is He wants to push back as it relates to the influence of China and Russia in Latin American countries, because it's about the U.S. interest. This U.S. first policy, it's about the security.
Yeah.
You don't threaten the United States of America. You don't get powerful more than the U.S. That's why the military spending. Secondly, it's about the nuclear capability. You don't have an upper hand on nuclear capability. That is why Russia and Iran. And lastly, it's about economic interest, oil, which is resources.
Thembisa, how, as a world citizen, how concerned are you by the recent movements? I mean, Sophie was talking about how America tries to play advantage. We know Greenland has been, on the lips of many of late. I was listening to the press secretary, U.S. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, saying that it's more about the Arctic region and to prevent their adversaries, and she mentioned China, she mentioned Russia, from continuous aggression. Give us the magnitude of the moment here.
Yeah, well, it's quite an ask. But anyway, it's concerning, of course, because this emboldens and to an extent to give ideas to the bullies in the world. They can go and accuse smaller countries of crimes. They can charge them in their own countries or territories. And they've got the right, after this precedent that was sent by Donald Trump, to go after those leaders that they've accused of the crimes. So the national sovereignty is certainly going to be compromised this time around. But importantly is that, these bullies that we have plenty of them around the world, by the way, can now start doing exactly what Donald Trump did to Venezuela. That's the first point. The other point which I think is very significant here is how American exceptionalism is now out the window. I'm not saying America has been free from wrong, but at least over the past couple of decades, American exceptionalism has been, to an extent, a guarantor of democracy. We've had the Americans, whenever there was a violation of any democratic principle or characteristics around the world, Americans were the first to comment. Of course, they were doing the opposite. So they had twisted tongue when it comes to certain things. They only commented when it suited them. But at least they were there to condemn the bullies and all the dictators around the world. Now we don't have anyone who's going to do that. We were forced to reduce our expectations and hope and start looking at certain countries and leaders that were for a very long time and still continue to oppress their own people and who are very undemocratic. They are now our hope against this new bully called Donald Trump to push back on these violations that we see going on. So we're in a very, very difficult position and situations. And right now is all country for itself in terms of protecting its own sovereignty and doing whatever it can to ensure that the semblance of democracy and freedoms that we've all been enjoying over the past decades are protected with the American exceptionalism thrown out the window by Donald Trump and his brutes.
Dr. Hadebe, I wonder your thoughts on how the world is reacting to all this. We've seen the reaction from the European leaders, not going specifically after Trump. What do you think about South Africa's reaction to this whole thing? Because you would think that there needs to be this navigation, this delicate balance between moral diplomacy as well as, I guess, pragmatic engagements, right? How do you strike the balance? And is Pretoria striking that balance?
I think currently the response by South Africa to Venezuela's threats and any other is that of normative consistency. We've been consistent in terms of respecting the idea of sovereignty in an intervention and multilateralism. But now the issue is that since in the UN, we are not able to enforce laws given the P5 and the rest. So our position there is compromised because of that. But coming straight to your question, I think there are three pages here which South Africa should be able to navigate. One is that of moral diplomacy, which is rooted on of South Africa's history of liberation, our previous ties with countries in the South, countries like Cuba, your Venezuela, your Russia, and Chinese. So that we have that moral diplomacy, which really we owe to those. And secondly, we have what we call a pragmatic realism.
Right.
So now we have to face the major powers or superpowers. They are here now before us. There is international law which is in place. We have the Security Council, we have the UN Charter, and it's clear, it's not ambiguous. It says, Charter Article 1.4, it says it prohibits the use of force by any other state.
Right.
But now we have to face that. And thirdly, we have that pressure now at a regional and domestic level.
Right.
We are seen as a powerful country in the region, so the world and the region itself, African region, so to speak, is looking upon us to be able to act. But our position is not problematic, that of following international law. The problem is with the lack of enforcement in the law itself. And we can't really reject that position, because if we do that, tomorrow it will be any other state, and it might be us. We will rely on this law to protect us. So our position is that of normative framework, but we are faced with this moral diplomacy.
It boils down to that, right, Sophie? Because although you have the UN Charter and the principles of it, it's still being violated. And you've heard as much from the UN Security Council this week. If Donald Trump says, this is my backyard, we're interested in the resources, who is going to stop them?
There is no one who is going to stop America if the American administration, through its commander-in-chief, President Donald Trump, take a decision to launch an invasion or attack on South Africa. There's no one. It's very difficult. No one came to the rescue of Saddam Hussein. No one came to the rescue of Muammar Gaddafi. And you would recall, it was left to statesmen, former statesmen and retired statesmen, Nelson Mandela, to rebuke the US. Perhaps let's go back there and listen what Madiba had to say in 2003 when that invasion happened in Iraq, and led by the Americans and the British. And we know the Prime Minister of Britain at that time, Tony Blair, has since apologized to say there were no weapons of mass destruction because they couldn't find it. But when the South African president, sitting president at that time, Thabo Mbeki, warned them that I have sent inspectors, scientists there to go and check, there's no such a thing. They didn't listen. He even spoke to President Bush to say there are no weapons of mass destruction. I've dispatched my Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister, Aziz Pahat, and scientists from South Africa. There's nothing like that. So the sitting president used diplomacy, but the retired President Madiba went very hard. Let's listen in.
What is the lesson of them acting outside the United Nations? Are they saying any country which believes that they will not be able to get the support of the countries which have had to are entitled to go outside the United Nations and to ignore it? Or are they saying we, the United Nations, are the only superpower in the world now? We can act as we like. Are they saying this is a lesson that we should follow? Or are they saying we are special? What we do should not be done by anybody. And if there is a country that has committed unspeakable atrocities in the world, it is the United States of America.
Former President Nelson Mandela, they're back in 2003. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we want to look at how, for instance, the administration of George W. Bush, when dealing with Iraq, how much of a departure the way Donald Trump is dealing with, and what's the possible consequences of that? 011-714-0677-7879 is the number to dial. Get dialing, we'll take your questions next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. I just want to remind you of the question of the week and be asking you, what assessment can be made of South Africa's diplomatic response to events in Venezuela and to threats of other invasions around the world? Let us know at SABC News_TV. Also, be opening up the lines 011-714-0677-7879. Thembisa, Fakude, let's pick up where we left off before the break. We were talking, I was listening to, looking at the era of George W. Bush when it comes to Iraq. And I'm not talking about the merits of whether it was right or wrong to go into Iraq. But he, or his administration, they went to the United Nations, they tried to explain the democracy element of going into Iraq. They also formed this multi-nation coalition. How much of a departure in terms of the way Donald Trump is doing things, and what's the possible consequences?
Well, the administration of President Bush, to an extent, respected multilateralism, and they also respected and saw the significance of the United Nations, both Secretary Council and General Assembly. Donald Trump does not respect multilateralism. He sees this as a waste of time. And the only way his foreign policy can thrive is if it destroys multilateralism. If it destroys multilateralism, he therefore cannot be held to account, because there won't be any platform that will hold him to account. It serves his purpose to destroy multilateralism. So this is the difference. And I think he's going to continue doing so. Not only Donald Trump, by the way, including Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. The only way that they can survive, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, of not going to jail is if there is no accountability, and that accountability can come in the form of multilateralism. In the case of Benjamin Netanyahu's ICJ, Donald Trump also understands that the only way he can continue with his imperialistic foreign policy is if he destroys multilateralism, he disturbs the smooth flow of international law, and that's the only way he can continue functioning and achieving his mission. So he's got no respect of multilateralism compared to George Bush, who at least still believed that multilateral system through the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly are both significant in terms of maintaining some semblance of global stability. So that's the difference.
Yeah. Sophie, you want to come in on that?
Yes, I want to say, yes, America will always be America. And the Monroe doctrine will always prevail, but some would be diplomatic, as my colleague has indicated. For example, I agree with him. You'd recall with the Iraq war, he did indicate that he was misled by Tony Blair, even though he hasn't or didn't want to apologize outright, President Bush, even though Tony Blair did apologize outright. Now, even in his engagement, President Bush with former President Thabo Mbeki, he used to be honest and listen. He used to listen. He used to listen. That is why he even requested South Africa to try and engage Hadebe on his robust criticism to the United States of America. He spoke to his counterpart because you would at least engage him. But at the end of the day, America will always be America, but it will differ as it relates to who is in office. For example, the tension between South Africa and the US, let us not forget, it started towards the end of President who has left office now, Joe Biden. Even during Joe Biden, there were tense moments on the issues related to Ukraine, on the issue of Lady R, but with President Trump, he has escalated the tension. So I think
so things won't automatically change if a Democratic comes into power, right?
A Democrat will be more diplomatic will be more diplomatic and will listen. But the reality is, I think the problem here is the foreign policy of the United States of America based on this Monroe doctrine, not putting peace first. It's all about the country first by all necessary means, or all means necessary.
Right.
So I think that's where the problem is. But every leader does apply America first in different ways, others in diplomatic way. That's why we always have a problem with reservations as it relates to the relationship between the United States of America and Israel. All the leaders of the United States of America do support Israel. That's why you can't resolve that problem in the Middle East, but they differ in terms of approach.
I wonder, Dr. Hadebe, are we entering a new era where we stop talking about regime change and talk about leadership change? And I make this point, when you look at the way things were done in Venezuela, you remove the sitting president, you spend a whole lot of money in terms of this military exercise. How does it benefit if you're talking about regime change, or if you're talking about democracy and benefiting the people of Venezuela and America? How does it benefit America and its people when you leave the government in place? You remove the leader, but you leave the government in place. What's your understanding on that?
I think the US have really learned from the past mistakes, if I may say so. Look at what happened in Libya, for example. Yeah. It was very costly, and it dragged for a very long time. They could not install government there after the so-called intervention. Also in Iraq, it was the case also. They could not install a government, a proper government, which they can really work together with. So now, seemingly, they have changed the modus operandi to say, let's just snap one person. And then I think they are hoping that the current government now under the vice president will be able to cooperate. I think they are betting on that. If it's not the case, obviously they will go for the Nobel Peace Prize. They will be able to install her. And we have seen that she has been reaching out to the US president, saying that she's also willing even to share the prize. So I think the idea now is to say, just remove one person so that you don't cause havoc that much, and then leave them with their government. So to speak, that won't be really a regime change, because the generals are still there, the ministers are still in place, and it's cost effective, so to speak. So now, you will recall that the companies were already there previously before the nationalization. So they will just go back to Venezuela and continue or pick up where they left before the nationalization, so to speak.
011-714-06777879. We ask you to call us. We understand we have Molotelo on the line. Molotelo, very good evening to you. What's on your mind? Your question to our guest?
Good evening, Blaine, and good evening to your guest, and Happy New Year, everyone. I think the first thing that you need to realize is that we are in an era of multilateralism, and South Africa being a global player, especially a strategic partner to so many countries, what we say and how we react to situations is usually telling. And I think what has happened with the whole Venezuela and Donald Trump issue, it is just exposing a lot of issues that have been bubbling under between different countries, because now he has also decided to move away from the European Union. I mean, from NATO. He's starting to say, no, actually, I do not need NATO. So he is defying all the rules that were put in place in order for the world to operate in a certain way. And in that way, I think he's ushering in a new style of politics that speaks to countries playing protectionism over multilateralism. So Ma'am Sophie has said that he's speaking about America first all the time by any means necessary. So it means that in our approach as South Africa, because we are such a strategic partner to a lot of countries worldwide, we need to now reassess how we go about our diplomatic relations with these countries. And I'm really glad that our international relations desk is so on the pulse in terms of reacting to situations. And the fact that we are able to stand up before anyone else does, yes, we might have our domestic issues, but I do believe that in us standing up before everyone else does, it does show a leadership, a global leadership that we hold in South Africa.
That's an interesting point, because a lot of the people that we spoke to as well, and you hear it, when you interact with people on a day-to-day basis, says, let's leave Donald Trump alone, sort out the issues at your own house, in your own backyard. We've got a lot of issues to deal with here in South Africa. But there is the other train of thought that also talks to the dangers of not participating or engaging in a global sphere. So, Molisela, thank you very much indeed for your call. I want to bring in Mafanetsa, calling us from Johannesburg. Mafanetsa, a very good evening to your question.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask my comment, and please allow me to foreground my comment by stating that it appears that by advancing at a great speed into uncharted waters in modern times, where adherence to international rules-based order is increasingly blurred and in some cases really eroded. And in the words of UN Secretary General, this unilateral operation in Venezuela really set a dangerous precedent. It demonstrates how countries with significant military capabilities and substantial economic influence can undertake unilateral military operations. And this reflects an emergence of hemispheric hegemonic influence, where one state asserts political and economic dominance in a manner reminiscent of Monroe doctrine, as it was mentioned. And this happens at the expense of international law. So if powerful nations can unilaterally intervene and use coercive territorial power and acquisition in smaller nations, this really places smaller nations in a vulnerable position, and this becomes sort of a global warning and also an erosion of sovereignty in one, and this risks cascading effects elsewhere, including in Africa. I'm really glad and pleased about the South African diplomatic response, which raises critical issues that must be addressed to safeguard international peace and promote multilateral dialogue in resolving disputes. So South Africa's position really reflects a firm adherence to established principles of international law and the United Charter specifications. So moreover, South Africa's stance really aligns with that of developing countries in regional blocs that have really condemned this military intervention in Venezuela and the looming one in Greenland.
Mafanetsa, thank you very much indeed, calling us from Johannesburg. Thembisa, I just want to bring you in, and Mafanetsa was talking about, speed and waters. Currently, we have a military exercise here in South Africa. It's called Will for Peace. The navies, various navies in South Africa from BRICS plus nations. I wonder how this is all going down in Washington.
Well, it's important, and I'm glad that you call it what it precisely was, which is BRICS plus naval drills. It was not Iran, China, Russia as separate nation drills, as many people would have loved to promote. It was a BRICS plus. It so happened that Iran is part of BRICS plus. It so happened that India, which did not participate, and Russia are part of BRICS plus. So South Africa did not choose Iran or prefer Iran to come in, but Iran is part and parcel of BRICS plus. If we had a problem with Iran, we should have protested when Iran was admitted into BRICS plus. So this is very important. I don't think this will create a problem for South Africa, precisely because this was a BRICS plus drill. It was not a specific country's drill with South Africa. So whatever the Americans would like to see happening, they will have to condemn everybody else who's part of BRICS, or condemn BRICS as a body or a bloc, instead of picking and choosing who to condemn. disagree with in terms of partnering and partnership and participating with South Africa in these drills. So United States is on a back foot here. But I think also the other important thing, of course, is that South Africa cannot compromise on its moral-based international relations. We have to continue with our moral-based international relations. The best we can do, of course, is to learn how to tell those that are opposing us in whatever it is that we do to go to hell and enjoy the ride. And this is a skill, of course, that the diplomats know very well. But we should continue working with the Americans as many clusters of government, particularly Department of Trade, Industry and Cooperation, and the competition has always been saying that they are going to continue with their charm offensive and trying to promote relationship with United States, because United States is a significant economic partner. But at the same time, we have to have the ability to say we have embraced a certain position because of our history in this country, one. Number two, we also like to see a world that will continue promoting these basic freedoms that we today enjoy. And there are thousands and millions of human beings around the world who sacrifice their comforts and lives for us to have this situation that we all enjoy in South Africa at the moment. And we can't, because of these disturbances that will only last for the 36 months, I believe, by the way, that will now have to compromise and decide to go back and embrace positions that will forever disadvantage future generations after this one.
I wonder, Sophie, if such events or such drills continues to irk the Americans, and again, I know I'm being a bit speculative here, but this is what people are talking about, wants to know what could be the worst case scenario. If it gets to a point where this relationship with South Africa and America deteriorates to such an extent, what is the possibility of targeted sanctions?
Well, I think what we should bear in mind is what is BRICS and why was BRICS formed? BRICS is not a military alliance. It's not NATO. It's not about attacking. It is about development and also progressive engagement economically. Therefore, the reason you have this drill is to protect the resources in maritime. That's why they are together and you have this drill. Secondly, this drill was planned, I think maybe even 2 years ago, because it's not something that you can do in 2 months' time. At that time, nobody anticipated that we will be talking about President Trump as the president of the US, but also having invaded Venezuela and him engaged in war talk, as we see Greenland. Now it's Cuba today. He has also warned Iran. Nobody anticipated that. And therefore, it had nothing to do with America. And President Trump, with his political advisors, military advisors, or security advisors, if he's got smart people, he should be informed that this has got nothing to do with the US. And therefore, the sanctions cannot be used because of these activities. We do military drills with America. We do it with the European countries. It's a norm for countries to engage in sharing expertise. But we know that there are people who are pushing in the Congress, in South Africa, particularly the right wing, that President Trump's administration imposed sanctions on some officials targeting the ANC officials because they are fighting their internal battle in South Africa. And unfortunately, President Trump, in most cases, he's being misled. And judging from Elon Musk's vigorous and more forceful push to criticize South Africa's trade policy as it relates to empowerment, something is brewing. And I have heard from many sources that there's that thought to find a way to impose sanctions on some people in South Africa. That would include your vocal opposition against the United States of America. Whether that will be implemented, never say never.
Oh, never say never. I'm going to take your social media comments in a short while. But Dr. Hadebe, on that point, your best educated guess, is something brewing?
I doubt, but we can not really undermine their capabilities, especially because this is not the beginning of their action. The fact that the AGOA have lapsed and then there were no renewal, so those were signs that they are taking a different approach towards South Africa. But I doubt that South Africa should exercise restraint. South Africa should continue to participate in world politics, which is governed by international law and the idea of sovereignty. But we cannot just sit back and say we are scared of the Americans. This is just a regime. And it's a phase. Our relations with the US did not start today and did not end today. Trump administrations would come and go, but the people of South Africa and the people of the USA have relations and long ties, so we can't really say we are going to step back and watch.
Right.
It can't be.
Let's take a look at some of your social media comments with regards to the question that we've been asking you, with regards to South Africa's approach as well. What do you make of that? What do you make of the stance that South Africa has taken with regards to what's been happening in Venezuela and some of the utterances from US President Donald Trump? Let's put up your comments. Let's have a look at what you have to say. All right, Siyabonga says, South Africa is known as the voice of reason across the globe. We always promote dialogue. We are non-aligned, but it doesn't mean we have no say on injustices across the globe. We are an important partner in global politics. And most of all, our leaders have shown resilience, bravery at the face of adversity and stood for what Mandela always stood for. Prince says, whatever stance South Africa adopts, we should weigh possible implications and be ready to handle them, says Prince. Neo says, in response to Daniel, we cannot isolate ourselves. Global issues should concern us, not for the sake of relevance, but because they directly affect our national security interests. Remaining silent in such critical matters has a way of backfiring far into the future. History will record our position and it will judge where we stood on issues that shape the world, says Neo. And Yulam says South Africa must just distance itself from issues of overseas. All right. Thembisa, some of your thoughts. Look, I would say in terms of the issues, the approach that America has taken, South Africans are divided. Some saying, let's stay out of it. Some saying, let's face the issues head on. Your thoughts?
Well, I think if we stay away, of course, we'll be supporting Trump's Make America Great Again, which is an isolationist foreign policy. I think we should continue sticking out our necks for justice and what's right and for a better world. And I think that's what South Africa is saying. But at the same time, South Africa, by the way, for those who don't know, is working very, very hard with its charm offensive, led by people such as Park Stau and Ronald Lamola, including our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, in trying to speak sense to the United States and explain to the United States that these right-wing organizations that go on peddling lies about the white genocide are not telling the truth. So the charm offensive has not stopped. The South African government continues to try and speak sense to Donald Trump whenever there's an opportunity. So this dual approach, I think, will eventually assist South Africa. But I think there's also an assumption that whilst we continue condemning these barbaric actions, whether it's in Venezuela or the genocide that continues to take place in full view of the world leadership and countries in Gaza and in Palestine, South Africa is doing nothing in terms of trying to improve relations. South Africa is improving relations or working towards improving relations on a daily basis whenever there's an opportunity with the United States.
Thembisa, Fakude, Dr. Hadebe, Sophie, Mokoena, thank you so much indeed. The better minds that give us perspective on what matters the most. No doubt this is an ongoing conversation. We will continue the conversation on SABC News, but for now, thank you so much indeed for your time. All right, before we go, here's my take. Look, the general consensus, and you heard it here first tonight, is that there needs to be an adherence to the principles of international law and rules that have been put in place for the fundamental purpose of creating a peaceful environment. Otherwise, how do we exist? How do we operate? How do we interact if we run afoul of these legal frameworks? A legitimate, peaceful way forward needs to be found. In times of uncertainty and confusion, how do we act? How do we think? Fundamental principles becomes all the more important in such times. Again, it's about justice, not just us, meaning the power of the law, be it international or domestic, should reflect always the best interests of the people. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube, as well as SABC Plus. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Unwrap Africa up next. Until next week, take care. Bye-bye.